The sun was already burning white-hot when Owen Gallagher spotted the figure collapsed near the skeletal remains of a sagebrush. And for a moment, he thought the desert had finally conjured up one of those mirages old-timers talked about after too many days alone with their cattle. He pulled his horse to a stop, squinting against the glare that made the sand shimmer like water, and when the figure didn't vanish, he felt his heart kick hard against his ribs. Someone was out here, miles from anywhere, and by the look of things they had been out here too long already. Owen dismounted fast, his boots hitting the hard, packed earth with a thud that sent up a small cloud of dust. The figure was a woman, he could see that now, dressed in torn calico that had once been blue but was now faded almost white by sun and dust. Her dark hair was matted with sand, her face turned away from the merciless sun, her lips cracked and bleeding. He dropped to his knees beside her and pressed 2 fingers against her throat, searching for a pulse. It was there, faint and fast like a bird's heartbeat, and he let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. "Madam," he said, his voice rough from disuse. He had been alone at his ranch outside Green River, Wyoming for 3 weeks now, and talking to cattle didn't count for much in the way of conversation. "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Owen uncapped his canteen and carefully tilted a few drops of water onto her lips. She stirred at that, her tongue moving instinctively to catch the moisture. He gave her a little more, supporting her head with his other hand. Her skin was burning hot, sun-scorched and dehydrated, and he knew he needed to get her out of this heat immediately. He looked around at the empty desert stretching in every direction. His ranch was 4 miles west, back the way he had come. Green River was 8 miles north. The woman needed water, shade, and probably a doctor, but moving her in this heat could kill her just as surely as leaving her here would. He made his decision in seconds, scooping her up as gently as he could. She was light, too light, and her head lolled against his shoulder as he carried her to his horse. Getting both of them onto the saddle took some maneuvering, but Owen had been ranching since he was 16 years old, and he was 32 now. He knew how to handle difficult situations. He settled her in front of him, one arm locked around her waist to keep her upright, and turned his horse toward home. The ranch was closer, and he had water and shelter there. The ride would be hard on her, but it was the best chance she had. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness during the ride, sometimes murmuring words he couldn't understand, sometimes going completely limp against him. Owen kept talking to her, nonsense mostly, just keeping up a steady stream of words to let her know she wasn't alone. He told her about his ranch, about the 100 head of cattle he was trying to keep alive through this brutal summer of 1882, about his dog Rusty, who was probably wondering where the hell he had gotten to. He told her she was going to be all right, even though he wasn't sure that was true. When the ranch finally came into view, with its weathered barn and small house hunkered down against the endless sky, Owen felt relief wash through him. He rode straight up to the house and dismounted carefully, lifting the woman down and carrying her inside. The interior was blessedly cool after the inferno outside, the thick adobe walls keeping out the worst of the heat. He laid her on his bed, the only bed in the small house, and went to work. First, water. He brought a cup and a cloth, dampening the cloth and wiping the dust and sand from her face, then holding the cup to her lips and coaxing her to drink. She managed a few sips before turning her head away. Her eyes opened briefly, unfocused and fever-bright, before closing again. Owen stripped away her ruined shoes, horrified by the blisters and cuts on her feet. She had walked a long way, that much was clear. He spent the next hour tending to her, cleaning her wounds as best he could, covering her with a damp sheet to help bring down her temperature, getting small amounts of water into her whenever she would take it. Her breathing gradually steadied, and the terrible heat of her skin began to ease. Owen pulled a chair up beside the bed and sat down, suddenly aware of how tired he was. He had been out riding fence lines since before dawn, and now the sun was setting, painting the sky outside his window in shades of orange and purple. The woman slept through the night. Owen dozed in the chair, jerking awake every hour or so to check on her. By morning, her fever had broken, and her breathing was deep and regular. He made coffee and johnny cakes in his small kitchen, and the smell of food must have reached her because when he came back into the bedroom her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. "You're awake," Owen said, setting down his coffee cup. "How do you feel?" She turned her head slowly to look at him, and he saw her eyes were a striking green, the color of new leaves in spring. She studied him for a long moment, taking in his sun-weathered face, his dark blonde hair, his work-worn hands. Then she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "Where am I?" "My ranch about 4 miles outside Green River, Wyoming," Owen said. "I found you in the desert yesterday. You were in bad shape. What's your name?" She closed her eyes, and for a moment he thought she had drifted off again, but then she said, "Penelope. Penelope Porter." "I'm Owen Gallagher," he said. "Can you tell me what happened? How did you end up out there?" Penelope's eyes opened again, and this time there was something haunted in them, something that made Owen's chest tighten. "I was running," she said. "I had to get away." "From what?" She was quiet for so long he thought she wasn't going to answer, but finally she said, "From the man I was supposed to marry, from a life I didn't choose, from everything." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I had to go. And then there was sand and sun, and I couldn't find water, and I thought I was going to die out there." She looked at him again, and her eyes were bright with tears that didn't fall. "But I'm here now. I'm home." The words struck Owen as odd, but he didn't question them. Instead, he said, "You're safe here. Rest now. We can talk more when you're stronger." Over the next 3 days, Penelope slowly recovered. Owen moved his bedding out to the small sitting room and gave her the bedroom, bringing her meals and fresh water, checking her wounds and applying salve to her blistered feet. She slept most of the time at first, but as her strength returned she began to sit up, then to move around the room, testing her legs. On the 4th day, she emerged from the bedroom dressed in the same torn calico dress, her hair brushed and tied back with a strip of cloth Owen had given her. She found him at the table, going over his account books by lamplight even though it was midday. The house was dim, shutters closed against the heat. "Mr. Gallagher," she said. He looked up and immediately stood, the courtesy ingrained from his upbringing back in Ohio. "Miss Porter, you should be resting." "I've rested enough," she said. "I need to talk to you." Owen gestured to the other chair and she sat down carefully, wincing slightly. Her feet were still tender. He sat back down himself and waited. "Thank you for saving my life," Penelope said. "I know I wouldn't have survived another day out there. Anyone would have done the same," Owen said. "Maybe, maybe not." She folded her hands on the table. "I need to tell you the truth about why I was out there." Owen nodded, not speaking. "I'm from Salt Lake City," Penelope began. "My father is a merchant there, successful, well-respected. When I turned 21 last month, he arranged a marriage for me to a business partner of his, a man named Marcus Thorne. Marcus is 45 years old, a widower with 3 children. He wanted a wife to care for his house and his children. My father wanted the business connection. No one asked me what I wanted." Her voice was steady, but Owen could hear the anger underneath it, banked but burning. "I told my father I wouldn't do it. I told him I didn't love Marcus, that I didn't want to spend my life as an unpaid servant to his children. My father said love was a luxury for people who could afford it, and I should be grateful Marcus was willing to take me at all. He said I was too old to be picky, too plain to hope for better. Owen looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since she had woken up. She wasn't plain at all. Her face was strong-featured, intelligent, her green eyes sharp and clear. Her dark hair caught the lamplight with hints of auburn. But more than her features, there was something vital about her, something alive and fierce that drew the eye. The wedding was set for 3 weeks ago, Penelope continued. The morning of the ceremony, I put on the dress my mother had made, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I knew I couldn't do it. I couldn't walk down that aisle and promise to love and obey a man I barely knew, couldn't sentence myself to a life I didn't want. So I changed into my oldest dress, packed a small bag, and I left. I took the money I had been saving since I was a girl, coins I had earned doing sewing and mending for neighbors. It wasn't much, but it was mine. She paused, and Owen saw her swallow hard. I bought a train ticket to Cheyenne. I thought I could find work there, maybe as a seamstress or a teacher. I'm educated, I can read and write and cipher. But when I got to Cheyenne, I found out that my father had sent telegrams ahead, warning people that his daughter had run away, asking them to send me back if they saw me. Suddenly, no one would hire me. No one would even rent me a room. "So you kept running," Owen said quietly. "I kept running," she agreed. "I bought passage on a stage heading south, got off in Green River, thought maybe I could lose myself in a smaller town. But the telegraph lines reach everywhere now. Within a day, people were looking at me sideways, asking questions. So I bought supplies and I started walking. I thought if I could make it to Colorado, maybe cross into New Mexico territory, I could get far enough away that my father's reach wouldn't extend. I thought I was following the trail south. I must have gotten turned around. The water ran out. The sun got hotter. And then I don't remember much after that, until I woke up here." She met his eyes across the table. "I'm telling you this because you deserve to know. My father might come looking for me. Marcus might come looking for me. If they find me here, there could be trouble for you. So I need to leave as soon as I'm able. I won't bring my problems to your door." Owen had been quiet through her whole story, and he was quiet now for a long moment after she finished. Then he said, "Where will you go?" Penelope looked down at her hands. "I don't know. You have money left." "A few dollars. Not much." "Can't get far on a few dollars," Owen said. "And your feet aren't healed enough for walking yet. You'd likely end up in the same fix I found you in, or worse." He pushed back from the table and stood, walking to the window and opening the shutters a crack to look out at the sun-baked yard. "I have a proposition for you." Penelope tensed. "What kind of proposition?" Owen turned back to face her, and his expression was serious but not unkind. "I need help on this ranch. It's a one-man operation right now, and it's more than one man can handle. I'm up before dawn and working past dark every day, and I'm still falling behind. The house is a mess. I'm eating beans and johnnycakes most days because I don't have time to cook proper meals, and half my gear needs mending that I don't know how to do. I can offer you room and board and a small wage. Not much, but enough to save up some money for wherever you want to go next. In return, you help me keep this place running. It would give you time for your feet to heal, time to figure out your next step. And if your father or Marcus do come around asking questions, well, hired help isn't the same as harboring a runaway. You're a free woman of legal age working for wages." "Nothing improper about that." Penelope stared at him. "You would do that. You would take the risk." "I don't see much risk," Owen said. "Your father and this Marcus fellow are in Salt Lake City. That's more than 400 miles from here." They'd have to care an awful lot to come all this way, and even if they do, you're 21 years old. The law says you're old enough to make your own choices. They can't force you to go back. You don't know my father, Penelope said, but there was hope in her voice now, tentative and fragile. Maybe not, Owen agreed. But I know Wyoming law, and I know a person has the right to live their own life. What do you say, Miss Porter? Do we have a deal? Penelope looked at him for a long moment, this weather-beaten rancher with kind eyes who had saved her life and was now offering her a lifeline. We have a deal, Mr. Gallagher, and thank you. Thank you more than I can say. Call me Owen, he said. If we're going to be working together, we might as well use given names. Owen, she said, testing the name, and you should call me Penelope, he nodded. All right then, Penelope, welcome to the ranch. The first weeks were an adjustment for both of them. Penelope's feet healed slowly, and at first she could only do light work around the house, cooking and cleaning and mending. Owen was surprised by how much difference it made. He came in from the range to find hot meals waiting, shirts with buttons that actually stayed on, floors swept clean of the perpetual dust. The house felt different, lived in instead of just occupied. As her feet healed, Penelope began to venture outside more. She learned to feed the chickens Owen kept, gathering eggs each morning. She learned to milk the cow, though the animal seemed to sense her nervousness and was stubborn about letting down her milk. She planted a small garden near the house, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil with precious water from the well. Owen, for his part, found himself looking forward to coming back to the house in the evenings. For years he had lived alone, ever since he had saved enough money to buy this land and start his own operation. He had grown used to solitude, or thought he had. But now he found himself hurrying through his evening chores so he could sit down to dinner with Penelope, listening to her talk about her day, telling her about his. She was smart, he discovered, with a quick wit and a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh. She asked him questions about ranching, about cattle and horses and the land, and she actually listened to his answers, filing away information like she planned to use it. She told him stories about growing up in Salt Lake City, about her mother who had died when she was 15, about books she had read and places she dreamed of seeing. Have you ever wanted to travel? She asked him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set. It was late July now, and the worst heat of the day had broken, leaving the air merely warm instead of scorching. Owen considered the question. Not really, he said. I've been to Ohio where I was born, been to Cheyenne a few times for cattle sales. That's about it. I guess I'm not much for traveling. I like knowing where I am, having land under my feet that belongs to me. That must be nice, Penelope said quietly. I never had that. Even in my father's house, I always felt like I was just visiting, waiting for the real thing to start. Does that make sense? It does, Owen said. And it did, somehow. He looked at her sitting in the old rocking chair he had bought at an estate sale years ago, her hands busy with mending even now, her face soft in the fading light. That first day when you woke up, you said something. You said you were home. What did you mean by that? Penelope's hands stilled. She was quiet for so long Owen thought maybe he had overstepped, but then she said, I don't know. I was half out of my mind with fever. But when I opened my eyes and saw you there, saw the walls of this house around me, I felt something I had never felt before. Safe. Like I had been searching for something all my life and had finally found it. It was foolish, probably. Doesn't sound foolish to me, Owen said. She looked at him then, and something passed between them, something warm and sweet and terrifying. Owen looked away first, his heart hammering. This was dangerous territory. Penelope was his employee, a woman he had taken in out of charity. She was running from one man who wanted to control her life. The last thing she needed was another man complicating things. But over the next weeks, Owen found it harder and harder to ignore what he was feeling. The way his pulse jumped when Penelope smiled at him. The way he found excuses to come back to the house during the day, just to see her. The way he lay awake at night in his makeshift bed in the sitting room, thinking about her sleeping just on the other side of that thin wall. He tried to push the feelings down, but they grew anyway, like the weeds that kept coming up in Penelope's garden no matter how many times she pulled them. August came, bringing with it slightly cooler temperatures and the first hints that summer might eventually end. Owen hired on 2 temporary hands to help with branding the spring calves, men he knew from town. They camped out by the barn and took their meals there too, and Owen was careful to make sure Penelope was introduced as his housekeeper. Nothing more. The men tipped their hats to her respectfully, and that was that. But on the 3rd day of branding, one of the men, a young fellow named Jimmy, started finding excuses to come up to the house. Asking for water when there was a perfectly good pump by the barn. Requesting bandages for scratches that didn't need bandaging. Complimenting Penelope's cooking with a wide smile that showed too many teeth. Owen found himself gritting his jaw every time Jimmy sauntered toward the house. He told himself it was just concern for Penelope's reputation, that he was being protective because she was under his care. But when he saw Jimmy trying to engage Penelope in conversation while she hung laundry, saw the way the younger man leaned in close, something hot and possessive flared in his chest. He walked over, his bootsteps deliberate. "Jimmy," he said, his voice level. "Those cattle aren't going to brand themselves." Jimmy straightened up fast. "Yes, sir, Mr. Gallagher, just getting some water. Pumps by the barn," Owen said. "Right, yes, sir." Jimmy nodded to Penelope and hurried off. Penelope looked at Owen, one eyebrow raised. That was rather abrupt. "He was bothering you," Owen said. "He was being friendly," Penelope countered. "There's a difference." "He was being too friendly. You're not here to be courted by every cowhand that wanders through." Penelope's eyes flashed. "And you're not my father or my intended to tell me who I can and cannot speak with." The words hit Owen like a slap, all the more so because they were true. He had no claim on Penelope, no right to feel jealous or possessive. "You're right," he said stiffly. "I apologize, it's not my place." He turned to walk away, but Penelope caught his arm. Her hand was small on his forearm, but her grip was firm. "Owen, wait." He stopped but didn't turn around. "I didn't mean it like that," Penelope said softly. "I know you're just looking out for me, and I appreciate it. But I need you to understand something. I'm not going to run from one man's control straight into another's. I can't do that. I won't." Owen did turn then and found her standing close, her green eyes serious. "I'm not trying to control you," he said. He stopped, not sure how to put it into words. "You just what?" Penelope prompted. He could lie, brush it off, keep things safe and distant. Or he could tell the truth, risk everything, lay his cards on the table and see what happened. Owen had never been much of a gambler, but he took a breath and said, "I don't like seeing other men looking at you. And I know I have no right to feel that way, but I can't seem to help it." Penelope's expression softened. "Why?" "Because I look at you too," Owen said, the words coming out rough. "Because I think about you all the time. Because somewhere along the way I stopped seeing you as my housekeeper and started seeing you as just you, Penelope. And that scares the hell out of me, because I know you're not ready for this. Might never be ready after what you've been through. And the last thing I want is to make you feel trapped here the way you felt trapped in Salt Lake City." The silence that followed felt like it lasted an eternity. Owen could hear his own heartbeat, could hear the distant lowing of cattle, could hear the wind rustling through the dry grass. Then Penelope said, You're wrong about one thing. What's that? I do feel ready, or I think I might be. I don't know. She gave a small, uncertain laugh. I've never felt like this before. When Jimmy was talking to me, all I could think was that he wasn't you, that his smile wasn't your smile, his voice wasn't your voice. I've been trying not to feel this way because you saved me and gave me a job, and it seemed wrong to confuse gratitude with something else. But it's not just gratitude, Owen. It's more than that. Owen's heart was pounding now, hope and fear mixing until he couldn't tell them apart. What is it then? Penelope stepped closer, and now they were standing near enough that he could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the small scar on her chin, the way her breath quickened. I don't know yet, she said, but I'd like to find out if you want to. I want to, Owen said, and then somehow they were kissing, her lips soft against his, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. It was a gentle kiss, tentative, both of them learning the shape of each other. When they pulled apart, Owen felt like he had been struck by lightning, every nerve singing. Oh, Penelope said, sounding dazed. Yeah, Owen agreed. Oh, they stood there grinning at each other like fools until a whistle from the direction of the barn reminded Owen that he had work to do. I need to get back, he said reluctantly. I know, Penelope said. Go on. We can talk more later. But as Owen walked back to the cattle pens, he felt like he was floating. Penelope liked him. Penelope wanted to find out what this thing between them was. The whole world seemed brighter suddenly. The sky a deeper blue, the sun a warmer gold. The two temporary hands finished their work and left a few days later, taking their pay and their thanks. Jimmy gave Penelope a longing look as he rode off, but she barely noticed, standing next to Owen with her hand tucked into his. After they were alone again, things changed between them, but in good ways. They still maintained separate sleeping arrangements, Owen insisting on propriety even though his whole body ached with wanting her closer. But they courted now, in the small ways people did. Owen brought her wildflowers from the range, tough little blooms that somehow survived the harsh climate. Penelope made his favorite meals and sat close to him on the porch in the evenings, their shoulders touching. They talked for hours, learning each other's histories, hopes, fears. Owen told her about growing up in Ohio, the youngest of 5 children, how his father had lost the family farm to debt, and his mother had died of grief shortly after. How he had come west at 16 with nothing but determination, worked as a ranch hand for years, saving every penny until he could buy his own land. How he had built this ranch from nothing, and how proud and terrified he was of it in equal measure. Penelope told him about the loneliness of her childhood, the way her father had grown cold after her mother's death, throwing himself into business and leaving her to be raised by a series of housekeepers. How she had educated herself by reading every book she could get her hands on, dreaming of a bigger life, a different life. How the arranged marriage had felt like the final door closing, locking her into the small box society had prepared for her. I'm glad you ran, Owen said one evening as they watched the stars come out. I know that's selfish of me, but I am. If you had married that Marcus fellow, I never would have found you. We never would have had this. This, Penelope repeated, and there was wonder in her voice. Do you know, I've never been this happy, not in my entire life. Even with all the uncertainty, even not knowing what comes next, I'm happy, because of you. Owen turned to her, taking both her hands in his. Marry me, he said. Penelope's eyes went wide. What? Marry me? Owen repeated. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few months. I know you just ran away from one proposal and probably the last thing you want is another one. But I love you, Penelope. I've loved you since the day you came out of that bedroom and told me your story with your chin up and fire in your eyes. I want to spend my life with you. I want to build something with you, here on this land. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to know that you're mine and I'm yours and nothing can change that. Tears were streaming down Penelope's face now, catching the starlight. You love me. I love you, Owen confirmed. More than I thought it was possible to love anyone. I love you too, Penelope said, her voice breaking. I've been so scared to say it, so scared to feel it, but I do. I love you, Owen Gallagher. So is that a yes? Owen asked, hardly daring to breathe. Yes, Penelope said, laughing through her tears. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes, I'll marry you. Owen pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, feeling her heart beat against his chest. This woman who had been running when he found her, who had been lost and desperate and half dead. This woman who had somehow become his whole world. They were married in early September, in the small church in Green River with the town's minister presiding. Penelope wore a simple dress of cream-colored muslin that they had bought from the general store, and Owen wore his best suit, the one he saved for funerals and the rare social occasion. There were only a handful of people in attendance, neighbors from surrounding ranches who Owen had become friendly with over the years. After the ceremony, they held a small celebration at the ranch, with food and dancing and laughter. One of the neighbors played fiddle, and Owen danced with his new wife in the dusty yard, holding her close as the sun set, and the stars came out one by one. That night, in the bedroom that was now theirs together, they made love for the first time with a tenderness that brought tears to Penelope's eyes. Owen was gentle, careful, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward they lay tangled together, skin against skin, and Penelope said, I was running. Now I'm home. You're home, Owen agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. You're home and you're mine, and I'm never letting you go. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. In October, just as they were settling into their new life together, a man came riding up to the ranch. He was well dressed, riding a fine horse, and he asked to speak with Owen Gallagher. Owen came out of the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers, Penelope following behind him. The moment she saw the man, she went pale and grabbed Owen's arm. Marcus, she said. Marcus Thorne dismounted, removing his hat. He was indeed in his mid-40s, with graying hair and a stern face. Penelope, he said, your father has been worried sick. I doubt that, Penelope said, her voice steady despite the way her hand trembled on Owen's arm. He sent me to bring you home, Marcus continued, as if she hadn't spoken. This foolishness has gone on long enough. You have responsibilities, a place in society. It's time to stop this childish rebellion and return where you belong. I'm not going anywhere, Penelope said. This is my home. Owen is my husband. I'm exactly where I belong. Marcus's eyes flicked to Owen for the first time, dismissing him in an instant. Your father can have that marriage annulled. You're his daughter, his property until you're properly wed to a suitable man. I'm not property, Penelope said, her voice rising. I'm 21 years old, married of my own free will. My father has no claim on me, and neither do you. Now see here, Marcus began, his voice hardening, but Owen stepped forward. I think you should leave, he said quietly. Marcus looked at him with contempt. This doesn't concern you, ranch hand. I'm her husband, Owen said. That makes it very much my concern, and you're on my land. My wife has told you she's not going with you. I'm telling you it's time to go. Her father will hear about this, Marcus said. He has resources. He can make trouble for you. He can try, Owen said, but like my wife said, she's of legal age and legally married. There's nothing he can do, and there's nothing you can do. So I suggest you get back on that fancy horse and ride back to Salt Lake City, And you tell Penelope's father that his daughter is happy and well cared for, and that's the end of it." Marcus looked between them, seeing the united front they presented. His face flushed with anger, but he must have realized he was beaten because he jammed his hat back on his head and remounted. "You're making a mistake, Penelope," he said. "You could have had a comfortable life. Now you'll spend your days in this God-forsaken desert with a man who can barely keep his own ranch running. Better a hard life with a good man than a comfortable cage with a cruel one," Penelope said. "Goodbye, Marcus. Don't come back." They watched him ride away, dust rising behind his horse. When he was out of sight, Penelope let out a shaky breath and turned into Owen's embrace. "Do you think he'll really go back to Salt Lake City?" "I think so," Owen said. "He's a businessman, not a fighter. He saw you weren't going to be easy to take, and it's not worth his time or money to pursue it further. Your father might bluster and threaten, but in the end, what can he do? You're my wife. That's a fact, legal and binding." "Your wife," Penelope repeated and smiled despite the tears on her cheeks. "I like the sound of that." Marcus didn't return, and as the weeks passed with no word from Salt Lake City, they began to relax. Winter came to Wyoming, bringing cold winds and occasional snow that dusted the landscape white. Owen taught Penelope to ride properly, and she took to it with enthusiasm, soon accompanying him on his daily rounds of the ranch. She learned to spot sick cattle, to read the weather, to understand the rhythms of ranch life. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Penelope reading aloud from the few books they had while Owen mended tack or sharpened tools. Sometimes they would just talk, about everything and nothing, building the foundation of a partnership that was about more than just love. Spring came, and with it the hard work of calving season. Penelope proved her worth during those exhausting weeks, working alongside Owen day and night to help the cows deliver their calves, nursing the weak ones, keeping the books on which calves belonged to which mothers. She was tireless, practical, unafraid of hard work or getting dirty. "You're amazing," Owen told her one morning as they stumbled back to the house after a long night dealing with a difficult birth. "I don't know how I ever managed without you." "You didn't," Penelope said with a tired smile. "That's why the place was such a mess when I got here." In May, Penelope realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was just the stress and hard work of calving season, but when another month passed and her body began to change in small ways, she knew. She was pregnant. She told Owen one evening after supper, just saying it straight out because she didn't know how else to do it. "I'm going to have a baby." Owen, who had been reaching for his coffee cup, froze. "What? A baby?" Penelope repeated. "I'm pregnant. Probably about 2 months along, I think." Owen's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, fear, then pure joy. He pushed back from the table and pulled Penelope into his arms, holding her tight. "A baby," he said, his voice rough. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Penelope asked, even though she could feel the answer in the way he held her. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it," Owen said. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright. "Are you happy? Are you scared?" "Both," Penelope admitted. "My mother died when I was young, so I don't remember much about babies or child rearing. And childbirth is dangerous. Women die from it. But yes, I'm happy. I want this child. I want our family." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Owen said fiercely. "I won't let it. We'll get the doctor from town to come out when it's time, and everything is going to be fine." Penelope didn't point out that doctors couldn't always prevent complications, that nature had its own plans regardless of what anyone wanted. Instead, she kissed him and said, "Everything is going to be fine." The pregnancy progressed through the summer months. Owen became almost comically protective, not wanting Penelope to lift anything heavy or do any of the harder ranch work. Penelope, feeling perfectly healthy, argued with him about it, but eventually they compromised. She would do lighter work around the house and garden, and he would hire a man to help with the heavier ranch labor. The man he hired was named Samuel, a drifter in his 50s who was looking for steady work. Samuel was quiet and competent, and he asked no questions about the young couple running the ranch. He bunked in the barn and took his meals there, giving Owen and Penelope their privacy. As fall approached and Penelope's belly grew round, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Owen built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth so there would be no splinters. Penelope sewed tiny gowns and blankets, her hands remembering the skills her mother had taught her long ago. They turned the small storage room off their bedroom into a nursery of sorts, whitewashing the walls and putting up curtains Penelope made from flour sacks. In late November, on a cold morning with frost thick on the ground, Penelope's labor began. Owen sent Samuel riding hard into Green River to fetch the doctor, then stayed with Penelope, holding her hand and trying not to show how terrified he was. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the day and into the night. The doctor arrived in the afternoon and took over, his calm competence a relief to both of them. Just after midnight, as a new day began, their son was born. He came out squalling, red-faced and furious, and when the doctor placed him in Penelope's arms, she started crying and laughing at the same time. Owen knelt beside the bed, looking at his wife and his child, and felt his heart expand until he thought it might burst. "He's perfect," Penelope whispered. "Look at him, Owen, he's perfect." "He is," Owen agreed, touching one finger to the baby's tiny hand. The baby's fingers closed around his, gripping tight, and Owen felt tears sting his eyes. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names during the pregnancy, going back and forth on various options. Now, looking at their son, Penelope said, "What about Daniel? It was my grandfather's name. He was a good man, kind and strong." "Daniel Gallagher," Owen said, testing it out. "I like it. Hello, Daniel." Welcome to the world. The first months of Daniel's life were exhausting and wonderful. He was a good baby for the most part, but he still needed attention around the clock. Owen and Penelope took turns walking him when he was fussy, feeding him, changing him, marveling at every tiny change and development. Samuel helped out by taking on even more of the ranch work, giving Owen more time with his new family. Winter passed into spring, and Daniel grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, active infant. He had Owen's blue eyes and Penelope's dark hair, and he smiled easily, especially at his mother. By summer, he was sitting up on his own, reaching for everything he could grab, babbling in his own language. The ranch prospered during that year. Cattle prices were good, and Owen's careful management paid off with a healthy herd and strong calves. He was able to pay off some of his debts and even save a little money. Penelope kept the books now, her neat handwriting and careful calculations ensuring nothing was missed or wasted. On their second wedding anniversary, Owen surprised Penelope with a gift, a beautiful mare, chestnut-colored with a white blaze on her face. "She's yours," he said, leading the horse into the yard where Penelope stood with Daniel on her hip. "I bought her from the Miller Ranch. She's gentle enough to ride with Daniel once he's a bit bigger, but she's got spirit too. I thought you might like her." Penelope handed Daniel to Owen and went to the mare, running her hand down the horse's neck. "She's beautiful," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "What's her name?" "Whatever you want to call her," Owen said. Penelope thought for a moment, then said, "Liberty. I want to call her Liberty." Owen smiled, understanding. "Liberty it is." That summer they had visitors. A wagon rolled up to the ranch one afternoon, and when Penelope went out to see who it was, she found herself face to face with a woman she didn't recognize. The woman was perhaps 60 years old, gray-haired and stern-faced. "Can I help you?" Penelope asked cautiously. The woman looked her up and down, then at Daniel, who was playing in the dirt nearby. "Are you Penelope Porter?" "Penelope Gallagher," Penelope corrected, feeling a flutter of anxiety. "I was Penelope Porter." "I'm Judith Thorne," the woman said. "Marcus's mother." Penelope's blood ran cold. "What do you want?" "I wanted to see for myself," Judith said. "Marcus came back from Wyoming 2 years ago full of stories about how ungrateful and foolish you were. Your father still talks about the shame you brought on his house. But I wanted to see with my own eyes what kind of woman would give up comfort and respectability for this." She gestured around at the ranch. "You should leave," Penelope said, moving to put herself between Judith and Daniel. "In a moment," Judith said. "But first I want to tell you something. I think you were right." Penelope blinked. "What?" "Marcus is my son and I love him, but he's not a kind man. He wasn't kind to his first wife, God rest her soul, and he's not kind to his children. You would have been miserable with him. When you ran away, I was glad. I never told anyone that, but I was. And now seeing you here, seeing that you have a husband and a child and a life you chose for yourself, I'm even more glad. You were brave, Penelope. Braver than most women ever get to be." Tears pricked Penelope's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Judith nodded. "I won't trouble you again. I just needed you to know that someone understood, someone was glad you ran." She climbed back into her wagon and drove away, leaving Penelope standing in the yard, shaking. When Owen came in from the range that evening, Penelope told him about the visit. He listened quietly, then pulled her into his arms. "You are brave," he said. "The bravest person I know, and I'm grateful every single day that you ran in my direction." The years passed, bringing with them the ordinary joys and sorrows of life. Daniel grew into a sturdy little boy, then a lanky child, curious and adventurous. When he was 3, Penelope became pregnant again, and this time the labor was easier, quicker. Their daughter was born on a spring morning and they named her Grace. Grace was different from Daniel in every way. Where he was bold and fearless, she was cautious and thoughtful. Where he was loud, she was quiet. But she had the same love of the ranch, the same connection to the land and animals. By the time she was 5, she could ride as well as her brother, and she had a special way with the cattle that neither Owen nor Penelope could quite explain. Samuel worked for them for nearly 10 years before he decided it was time to move on. He left with their thanks and a generous bonus, heading west to see the ocean before he got too old. Owen hired another hand to replace him, then another, as the ranch grew and prospered. By the time Daniel was 12 and Grace was 9, the ranch was one of the most successful in the county. Owen had expanded the herd, bought more land, built a bigger barn and a bunkhouse for the permanent hands they now employed. The little house where Penelope had first woken up had been expanded too, with 2 more bedrooms, a proper dining room and a parlor. But the best part, the part that made all the hard work worthwhile, was the family they had built. Owen and Penelope were as in love as they had been on their wedding day, maybe more so. They had weathered droughts and hard winters, sick cattle and money troubles, the everyday struggles of ranching life. They had raised their children together, teaching them to read and cipher, to ride and rope, to understand the value of hard work and honest dealing. On a summer evening when Daniel was 15 and Grace was 12, the whole family sat on the expanded porch, watching the sun set over the land they loved. Daniel was talking about maybe going to Cheyenne for high school, getting more education than the small school in Green River could provide. Grace was showing them a sketch she had made of one of the new calves, surprisingly detailed and lifelike. You ever think about what would have happened if I had taken a different route that day? Owen asked Penelope quietly, while the children were distracted. If I had been checking the south fence line instead of the east, all the time, Penelope admitted. I think about what would have happened if I had died out there in the desert, or if you had left me for someone else to find, or if I had been too afraid to stay here and had kept running. Glad you stopped running, Owen said, taking her hand. I didn't stop, Penelope said. I just changed direction. I ran toward something instead of away from it. I ran toward you, toward home. Years continued to unfold, each one bringing its own stories. Daniel did go to Cheyenne for school, studying hard and eventually becoming a veterinarian. He came back to Green River to practice, serving all the ranches in the area, and married a teacher named Elizabeth. They had 3 children of their own and built a house in town. Grace stayed on the ranch, working alongside her father and eventually taking over more and more of the daily operations. She married later, at 26, to a cowhand named Thomas who worked on a neighboring ranch. They built a small house on the far edge of the property, and their children grew up running wild across the land, just as their mother had. Owen and Penelope grew old together, their hair going gray, their bodies slowing down, but their love never diminished. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set. They still told each other stories, still laughed at each other's jokes, still found comfort in each other's presence. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren, friends and neighbors, all coming together to honor the couple who had built something lasting out of a chance meeting in the desert. Late in the evening, when the party was winding down and people were starting to leave, Owen and Penelope slipped away from the crowd. They walked out past the barn, past the corrals, to a small rise that overlooked the whole ranch. The moon was rising, full and bright, painting everything in silver. 30 years, Owen said, putting his arm around Penelope's shoulders. Can you believe it? Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, Penelope said. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday that you found me in the desert, dying from the sun. Best day of my life, Owen said. Finding you. Best day of mine too, Penelope agreed. The day I stopped being lost. They stood there for a long time, looking out over the land they had tended and loved for 3 decades. The land where they had built their home, raised their children, created a life neither of them had imagined was possible. I love you, Owen said, the words as true and powerful as they had been the first time he said them. I love you too, Penelope replied. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for giving me a home. You gave me a home too, Owen said. Before you, this was just a ranch, just land and cattle. You made it something more. You made it a life worth living. As they walked back to the house, their hands clasped together, both of them felt the deep contentment of a life well lived. The desert had nearly claimed Penelope all those years ago, but instead it had given her to Owen, and together they had bloomed in this harsh, beautiful place. Inside the house, their family waited, multiple generations gathered under one roof. Daniel was telling a story that had everyone laughing, his children hanging on his every word. Grace was helping clear plates, her husband beside her, their youngest daughter perched on his shoulders. Friends and neighbors mingled, eating cake and drinking coffee, celebrating love and family and the bonds that held them all together. Owen and Penelope stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it all in. This was what they had created, not just a successful ranch, though it was that. Not just children and grandchildren, though they were blessed with those, but a home in the truest sense of the word, a place of love and safety and belonging. As the evening wore on and eventually drew to a close, As the guests departed and the family settled down for the night, Owen and Penelope made their way to their bedroom. It was the same room where Penelope had first woken up all those years ago, though it had been expanded and improved over time. The bed was the same bed where Daniel and Grace had been born, where Owen and Penelope had comforted each other through sorrows and celebrated joys. They got ready for bed with the easy familiarity of 30 years of marriage, moving around each other in the small space without collision. When they were settled under the covers, Penelope rested her head on Owen's shoulder, fitting against him the way she had done thousands of times before. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Taking me in that day? All the trouble I brought to your door?" "Not for one single second," Owen said firmly. "You were never trouble, Penelope. You were a blessing, the best thing that ever happened to me." "I was running," Penelope said softly, repeating the words she had spoken that first fevered day. "But now I'm home." "You're home," Owen agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And you always will be." They drifted off to sleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the family they had built and the life they had created. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the scent of sage and dust and home. The ranch settled into nighttime quiet, cattle lowing softly in the distance, horses moving in their corrals, the whole place breathing with life. In the years that followed, Owen and Penelope continued their life on the ranch, though they gradually stepped back from the hardest work, letting Grace and Thomas take over more of the daily operations. They spent more time with their grandchildren, telling them stories about the old days, teaching them to ride and rope and understand the land. When Owen was 68 years old, he suffered a heart attack while out riding the fence line. He made it back to the house, but barely, and for a week it was uncertain whether he would survive. Penelope never left his side, sitting by his bed day and night, holding his hand and telling him stories, reminding him of all the reasons he had to live. He pulled through, but he was weaker after that, his body reminding him that he was not a young man anymore. The doctor told him to take it easy, to rest more, to let other people do the heavy lifting. Owen grumbled about it, but he complied, because the thought of leaving Penelope alone was unbearable. They had 10 more years together after that. Years of sunsets on the porch and quiet evenings by the fire. Years of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Years of slow, peaceful days. Owen's body might have been failing, but his mind stayed sharp, and his love for Penelope never wavered. One spring morning, when the desert was blooming with wildflowers after an unusually wet winter, Owen didn't wake up. Penelope knew even before she touched him that he was gone, passed peacefully in his sleep, the way everyone hopes to go. She lay beside him for a long time, holding his hand and crying, saying goodbye to the man who had saved her life and given her a home. The funeral was huge, the church in Green River packed with people whose lives Owen had touched over the decades. Ranchers and cowboys, shopkeepers and teachers, friends and family, all coming to pay their respects to a good man who had lived a good life. After the funeral, after the burial in the small cemetery outside town, the family gathered at the ranch. Penelope moved through the house like a ghost, accepting condolences and comfort, but feeling hollow inside. How was she supposed to go on without Owen? How was she supposed to wake up every morning knowing he wouldn't be there? But as the days passed, she found her way forward. She had her children, her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren. She had the ranch, the land Owen had loved. She had memories enough to fill a lifetime, and stories to tell anyone who would listen. Penelope lived for another 7 years after Owen passed, staying active and engaged with the ranch and the family. She taught her great-grandchildren to bake bread and plant gardens. She told them stories about their great-grandfather, about the day he found her in the desert, about the life they had built together. She made sure they understood that love was worth fighting for, worth running for, worth everything. When Penelope died at the age of 84, peacefully in her sleep just as Owen had, she was buried beside him in the Green River Cemetery. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered once more, celebrating a life well lived and a love that had lasted through everything. Years later, decades later, their great-great-grandchildren would still tell the story. The story of how Owen Gallagher found a woman dying in the desert on a blazing summer day in 1882. How he saved her life, and she saved his in return. How they fell in love and built a ranch and a family and a legacy that endured long after they were gone. The ranch was still running, now managed by the fifth generation of Gallaghers. The house had been expanded and modernized, but the original bedroom where Penelope first woke up was still there, preserved as a sort of shrine to the family's history. Couples who got engaged would often visit the ranch, standing on the porch where Owen and Penelope had courted, hoping some of that legendary love would rub off on them. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting and the wind was just right, people swore they could see two figures standing on that rise past the barn, holding hands and looking out over the land they loved. Ghosts, maybe, or just tricks of the light. But real or not, it was a comfort to know that somewhere, somehow, Owen and Penelope were still together, still home. The story of the lonely rancher and the woman he found in the desert became a legend in Green River, passed down through generations. It was a story about courage and chance, about finding home in the most unexpected places, about love that transcended circumstance and hardship. It was a story about two people who had been lost and alone, finding each other against all odds and building something beautiful together. And at its heart, it was a simple story, the kind that has been told since the beginning of time. Boy meets girl. Boy saves girl. They fall in love. They build a life together. They live happily ever after. But simple doesn't mean easy, and it doesn't mean common. What Owen and Penelope had was rare and precious, forged in the harsh Wyoming desert and tempered by years of hard work and devotion. They had faced challenges that would have broken lesser people, but they had faced them together, and that had made all the difference. Their great-great-granddaughter, a girl named Penelope after her famous ancestor, often sat in the original bedroom, reading the journals that the first Penelope had kept. The journals told the full story, in Penelope's own words. The fear she had felt running from Salt Lake City. The desperation as she wandered lost in the desert. The moment of waking in a strange bed and seeing Owen's kind face. The slow building of trust and then friendship and then love. The challenges of their early years together. The joy of their children being born. The quiet contentment of growing old together. I was running, now I'm home. The first Penelope had written in her journal on her first wedding anniversary. I spent 21 years of my life searching for something I couldn't name, feeling like I was waiting for my real life to begin. And then I found Owen, or he found me, and everything changed. This ranch, this life, this man, this is what I was running toward all along. I just didn't know it until I got here. Young Penelope closed the journal carefully, running her hand over the worn leather cover. She looked around the small room, imagining her great-great-grandmother lying in this very bed, recovering from her ordeal in the desert. She thought about the courage it had taken to run away from everything familiar, to strike out alone with no guarantee of safety or success. She thought about the chance encounter that had changed two lives forever. Outside, the Wyoming sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The ranch was quiet, settling down for the night. In a few hours, young Penelope would go back to her own house, her own life. But for now, she sat in this room full of history and love, feeling connected to the past in a way that made her heart full. The story of Owen and Penelope Gallagher was a story with a happy ending, the kind of ending everyone hopes for but few achieve. They had found each other, loved each other, built a life together. They had raised children who loved them, created a legacy that endured. They had been happy, truly happy for more than 50 years, and in the end, that was everything. That was the whole story. A lonely rancher found a woman lost in the desert. She was running, but with him she found her home. They fell in love, got married, built a ranch, raised a family, grew old together, and died knowing they had lived fully and loved deeply. It was a story as old as time and as fresh as tomorrow. It was a story about the power of chance and choice, about seizing opportunities and being brave enough to take risks. It was a story about the transformative power of love, how it could take two broken, lonely people and make them whole. As young Penelope finally stood to leave, she took one last look around the room. She could almost feel her ancestors' presence, could almost hear their voices whispering encouragement and wisdom. Be brave, they seemed to say. Take chances. Run toward what you love, not away from what you fear. And when you find your home, whether it's a place or a person, hold on to it with everything you have. She turned off the light and closed the door softly behind her, carrying those lessons with her out into the gathering darkness. The ranch would be here tomorrow, and the day after, and for generations to come. A testament to what two people could build together when they had courage and love and determination. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Owen and Penelope Gallagher were still together, still in love, still home. Their story had ended, but the love they created lived on, echoing through the years, inspiring everyone who heard it to be a little braver, a little kinder, a little more willing to take a chance on love. Because in the end, that's what their story was really about. Taking a chance. Being brave enough to run towards something instead of away. And finding, in the most unlikely place and the most unexpected way, the home you had been searching for all along. The desert wind whispered through the sagebrush, carrying with it the memory of a hot summer day in 1882, when a lonely rancher rode out to check his fence line and found something more precious than gold. He found a woman, lost and dying. He saved her life. She gave him a reason to live. Together, they created a love story for the ages. And that love, that beautiful, hard one, enduring love, was still alive in every Gallagher who walked the land, in every couple who stood on the porch at sunset, in every person who heard the story, and believed that true love was possible. That home was something you could find even when you weren't looking for it. That running toward your dreams was always better than running away from your fears. The story was over, but the legacy continued. The ranch stood strong, the family thrived, and the memory of Owen and Penelope's love shone like a beacon across the decades, lighting the way for everyone who came after them. They had found each other in the desert, two lost souls becoming one found heart, and they had built something eternal. It was a happy ending, the kind that warms the heart and brings tears to the eyes. It was the ending they both deserved after everything they had been through. And it was an ending that was really a beginning, the start of a legacy that would outlive them both by generations. Owen Gallagher and Penelope Porter had found each other on a blazing summer day in the Wyoming desert. And together, they had created a love story that would never die. They had lived, they had loved, they had built a home and a family and a life worth remembering. And in doing so, they had proven that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, that love can bloom even in the harshest desert, And that home is not a place but a person, a feeling, a choice you make every single day. Their story was complete, their love eternal, their legacy assured. And that, in the end, was everything.